This video was digitized from the original DVD in 2023 by Simply Franciscan. It is part of the Zmuda-Moffat Collection of video recordings of lectures given by Franciscan professors and theologians on topics of Franciscan theology, charism, spirituality, and ministry. The lectures span more than 20 years. The Zmuda-Moffat Collection captures some of the seminal lectures shared with the Franciscan family in the rediscovery of the Franciscan intellectual tradition, a process which began in the 1970s and continues today. Sister Lisa Zmuda and Sister Coughlin Moffat videotaped these lectures from approximately 2001 through 2022 with permission from the speakers. Separately, they created and distributed study guides to accompany the recordings. Those study guides are available with the videos. Please look for a link in the YouTube post. For further information on the Zmuda-Moffat Collection, please visit our website at simplyfranciscan.org.
And that idea of generosity and presence, as I said, comes from Mary Beth. And it's in Scotus for Dunces, the chapter on communion, where she's talking about the centrality of the Trinity for Scotus and the dynamism. The dynamism of love and relationship that is God. And as Seamus challenged us to see so well yesterday in terms of how that good, that love is poured out, is self-diffusive in this initiating relationship of God with us, and there we are, with this intellect and this will, to partake of that, to participate that, and to mirror, to imitate, to reflect, even if dimly in some way, this divine life and love. And so it's in response to divine generosity and presence, the human person is called to a similar life of generosity and presence. Now, I hope that you, like me, think, I got to put this book down for a few minutes and think about this. What would happen to my life if that was my intention? If that was a central piece of my consciousness and my self-understanding? How would it inform, how would it challenge my choices? So that's the perspective that I want to try to bring to this, and I'm trying to suggest that basically this might be another way of talking about gospel perfection. Or, as Bonaventure might talk about it, the perfection of charity, the highest form of loving. Or as Francis might have talked about it in terms of following Christ. Or Claire will use the image of both following and imitating. So I think this might simply be another metaphor that perhaps might give more emphasis to the deep insights of Scotus and how he's, again, I think, pushing the envelope for us and challenging us to open our minds in some ways, which is radically going to affect our hearts and our choices. Our actions and our choices, therefore, are critically important here. And Daniel Hominiak, in his book, The Human Core of Spirituality, says that through our actions, our choices, we create, as it were, ourselves. We become the person who believes this, does that sort of thing. We embody the set of meanings and values which, in fact, define our lives. How do I take these values out there and somehow experience the conflict and the turmoil of coming to a new sense of identity that includes a valued way of being humble, of being generous, of choosing to be present to the other to the extent that I am able. Again, as Mary Beth was saying this morning, this is never to the diminishment or the destruction of the self. I'm the doormat, just walk in. How do we learn to model an appropriate and creative way of living life well? So as Catherine picked up yesterday from Mary Beth in terms of the poise and the praxis in the presence, where there's always that possibility that I have of choosing to do, to be for, to serve, to allow the needs of the other to become a little bit more important than my own. This, of course, is the question of the will. For me, Francis Bonaventure says something extremely important of Francis that I think is invaluable for us in thinking about formative experiences. Again, you can't see him before the cross. He's behind the veil. He's in the shadows. But Bonaventure says, Francis did not acquire his knowledge by reflecting in general terms on a limited number of truths, but by individual experience over a wide range of life. Again, that becomes so important for us. It's this wide range of life. Going back then, how do I learn to enter deeply into these experiences? Not just looking at them psychologically to find out how my Myers-Briggs numbers are doing or how my Enneagram profile is playing itself out here, but to really begin to consider the spiritual implications of this. The deeper meaning, the values, and whether or not generosity, presence, and love are something that I'm willing to try to move more clearly to the center of my life and my experience. Now, I think we're all trying to do this. And we hope that someone entering into a formative experience with us and the brothers and sisters that we're living with are doing the same thing. I think this needs to be brought, however, to a higher level of consciousness and awareness because it is so important. It is so critical for us as Franciscans because it's not going to be so much about what we do, but who we are, how we are living, how we are relating, how we are loving. Okay? And that becomes the barometer by which people understand who we are and what we're doing in our lives. Because what's key here is that somehow the unearned power of God is breaking into our lives. It's a power of love which reveals our profound need in ways that does not destroy us. It heals our wounds so that we might serve others. Again, this whole dynamic process. But what's important for us is to realize that we're not looking at this simply psychologically, but spiritually. God's loving power is breaking into our lives so that we, in turn, might take up the work of the gospel. How is that breaking into our lives? We believe that love is being enfleshed and incarnated in all kinds of different ways. In the second quotation there he says, we're becoming a new creation in Christ. The freeing and the strengthening call in which I am enabled, through God's word and way, to believe that I am sent in my time as God's witness. This is our dream of the formative outcome. That a person wants this and has entered into an experience, that as they move through the stages of this, they come to a clear sense of that and consciousness of that, not in any kind of proud or arrogant way, but incredible humility in terms of what they're called to, and this incredible spirit of poverty in the sense of what they have to let go of in order to pursue this way. And there's the generosity and the presence and the love, hopefully breaking through. Therefore, two questions, two challenges, I think. I can't create formative experiences, but it is within my power to create the possibility of the circumstances wherein this might happen. Secondly, I think another way to look at this is, will someone be present to accompany the individual through that experience? Again, we come from a tradition, for example, Francis and Leo. They talked while they walked along the way. And Francis wrote to Leo, "As I said to you along the way." We value very much those 4 short, brief letters from Claire to Agnes because it says something to us about what? Relationship, interdependence, turning to one another. And we need to be enriched by the fact that she says to Agnes, you make up what is lacking in us. That great sense of individuality and respect for the difference, but that relationship. David of Augsburg, a 13th century Franciscan formator, said this in his important spiritual writing. He says, "Always keep some guide or mentor who may instruct you by word and example." David of Augsburg also says, "Let those be your guides who have your spiritual interests at heart, so that they may encourage you to go forward in the approved way." Another example from our tradition, Francisco de Osuna. He says, "Although everyone may appear good, and you may consequently view them as your teacher, you should select one who can best suit your needs." Another place he says, "Pay attention to everything that happens along the way, regardless of how minute. And mention everything to your teacher, so that he can explain it to you and caution you." But I think it's the spirit of it. And this is what becomes so key to a formative experience, I think, that there's a discipline and there's a skill by which I'm continually gathering a moment to try to be conscious of what is going on in my life. How is this happening for me? I think Bonaventure had an incredible insight into this, and the text from the Major Legend is a place where I think we can discover this. In chapter 1 of the Major Legend, Bonaventure tells us, in the very first paragraph, he tells us that Francis was very much a man of his times. And immediately, as a good Franciscan, he tells us a story. And it's a story about Francis being determined not to be a deaf hearer of the gospel, but that he was distracted by the press of business. Again, I interpret this, as Mary Beth was talking about it, in terms of I'm distracted, I'm preoccupied, my desire is about business, about being a successful merchant. It doesn't make me a bad person, but I'm concerned about selling what I got to sell. So that's what Bonaventure is talking about here in terms of distraction, preoccupation. Bonaventure also says that Francis came to his senses. He doesn't want to be a deaf hearer of the gospel. A man asks him for something for the love of God, and he turns him away. because he's distracted and preoccupied, but he came to his senses. His awareness was raised. And as a result of that, he committed himself to never refuse someone who begged for the love of God as long as he had something to give them. I think that's a great illustration of a formative experience. This is what happened. I'm a believer. I intend to live the gospel. Oh, I'm too busy to think about that. Look at that. Okay? Awareness of self, coming to senses, and realizing that if I'm going to live this form of life, what is it asking me? What choice does it propose to me as a possibility? It never imposes the choice. It simply opens it up to me as the possibility. And what Bonaventure is really doing here, I think, if we can get to the next slide, is to talk about what is God's plan for Francis, for you, for me. It's that we would not be ignorant of God's plan. And again, what's that plan? Well, it's Ephesians. That we would be what? Holy, blameless, full of love. Okay? That's God's plan. Mary Beth emphasized that over and over again. What was God's plan? What was God's intention? Will that become my intention? And will I embody that? Will I enflesh that intention by the choices that I make? But he says that Francis was distracted by business and drawn down towards earthly things. And again, this confronts us with the fact that there are a lot of obstacles on this journey. Many of the obstacles have to do with disordered desire. I got to take care of myself. I got to do this. I got to do that. I don't have the inner freedom to enter into this experience. Okay? I'm always someplace else. Okay? And Francis had not yet learned to contemplate. Don't understand that in a high way. Understand that basically in terms of he had not yet learned to be a person of prayer. I think he is a believer like many believers in our world. But he's ignorant of God's plan. He has not yet learned a process or a methodology to kind of sort through the emotions and the tensions and a sense of identity, and he has not yet learned to pray. Okay. So that's what Bonaventure is going to do, is use as kind of a lens against which he tells not only the first story, but no surprise, he tells 7 stories about Francis's early experience through which he came to an awareness. He came to his senses that he was not living according to the form, not living according to the gospel. Some of those experiences involved other people, a leper, for example, a poor knight. Some of those experiences simply involved his own struggle of his heart, where he found himself drawn to go to places of quiet and solitude. Okay. So I think in that first chapter of Bonaventure's life, he tells us this incredible story of Francis in a way that, again, not looking at this as a historical critical study, where we can parse every word of what Bonaventure's doing and get into all the critiques and whatnot, but can we approach this as, on one level, as a story? And can his experience in some way help me to unpack my experience? We got 3 volumes of wonderful stories. We can do a great job of helping everyone to understand all the things that are going on, and Celano's trying to achieve this, and Bonaventure has a different model, and therefore he leaves out this and he adds this, and that's a wonderful book by Jacques Delarone over there about those sources. But there's another way in which those sources are invaluable to us, I think, because they're a story that hopefully is outside of me, not a fairy tale, but a story that begins to show me how, let this come forward. Don't be afraid of the conflict, of the doubt, of the confusion, of the struggle. Let it come forward. Okay? You can work with that. And that's why we recommend that you have someone accompany you. This can be very scary, very frightful, almost overwhelming. I'm trying to be a self, but I'm not there. And see, I think this is the kind of true self-knowledge that Bonaventure thinks is critically important here. What I'm trying to say here is that a formative experience has 2 characteristics. First of all, it's an encounter. It shakes the self-world relationship. Our sense of identity is threatened. The world is not as we experienced it before. We are no longer what we were before. We live with the anxiety, we wrestle with it, we force it to mean. A true encounter. Think about it. Where are the places, the moments, who are the people? That your life was never the same because you met them. But it's that kind of experience. You're not as you were before. Okay? And you got to work with it. Okay? Because if you walk away with it, it doesn't necessarily become a vehicle through which you are transformed, through which you can find a pathway to the conversion that we as Franciscans love to talk about. This is the concretes of the conversion, the particulars, the difficulties. Therefore, the other thing that I love to put it with regard to this is that the encounter and this struggle creates the possibility of true change. And this is from Erik Erikson. It's on your paper. It's a matter of worthwhile conflict that leads through the painful consciousness of one's position to a new consciousness in that position. Again, Francis came to his senses. He was not living according to his intention. And so he made a new choice, a different choice. Before I can choose differently, I have to realize that there's a gap. There's a dissonance. There's a discontinuity. And again, we tend to have that kind of psychological inclination that no matter how bad it is, we're going to make it look like it's all right. Okay? We're going to make it look like it's all right because we don't want anyone to know that we're weak, that we're vulnerable, that we're limited, that life is imperfect, and so on and so forth. So we got a lot to work against, don't we? Before we can even begin to think about this, because you see, if I got to put the mask on, then I want to be conscious of this. What makes me believe that I'm going to choose something differently? So hopefully this at least helps us understand why conversion takes a little effort, takes a little time. Okay? So that's what it's all about. So for Bonaventure, it presumes the question of true self-knowledge, or as he says in another place, a just assessment of yourself. One line that hopefully is helpful to you from the Perfection of Life, he says, we must learn the measure of our spirit. Discuss with ourselves what we are, what we were, made in the image of God. Okay? What we ought to be by striving industriously, and what we can yet be by grace. Okay? Can you carry that within you? Okay? What might I yet be? By effort, by begging for the grace, the assistance that I need. But I think this is the risk. Again, this power of love is somehow going to be given to me. That's what Jesus' promise is. That I will be able to strive for this as best I can. Never perfectly, never completely this side of heaven, but to the extent that I am able. Again, so I'm in this paradigm. I'm in this creative tension, and I see it as something that is life-giving, life-enriching. Is a formative experience, how does one enter into one's psycho-spiritual terrain? There's 3 points that I wanted to focus on in terms of SCOTUS. And again, looking at this more from a spiritual perspective. Again, one of my favorite books, SCOTUS for Dunces, a little quote. The dignity of the created order and the enormous value of the human person. This means that we, as rational and free persons, choose in light of ultimate goodness. We imitate God's own creativity and are the dynamic image of God. Our contingent acts reveal finite beauty and freedom. In the same way that divine contingent acts reveal infinite love, infinite divine beauty and freedom, our choices are never the measure of the good, rather they are measured by the good established by God. Again, I would suggest that that's a core spiritual horizon against which I judge my choice. Second is the whole question of the heart and its affections. Mary Beth was struggling this morning to find language to talk about how we're made, our DNA, and the orientation of our lives, to be able to adequately take care of ourselves and at the same time to be able to transcend ourselves, to choose beyond ourselves without necessarily destroying ourselves. How will we move beyond this? What is going on inside of me? Again, Mary Beth talks about the fact that these are metaphysical orientations, but they do reveal themselves in some ways in terms of our emotions. So again, not what am I thinking about, what am I struggling with? What's going on in my heart? What are the conflicting and competing desires that I'm experiencing? Will I confront them? Will I choose through them? And again, I love the phrase that you use. I know when I'm into the affection for justice, the highest affection, when my choice costs me something. And again, we understand that as Franciscans, it involves a dimension of poverty. I have to be free enough and strong enough and risking enough, if you will, to let something go, so that I can be a clearer image of the generosity and the presence, which is just a very dim reflection of the divine generosity and presence. That's what a worldview does to you. What would happen if we thought about our life and our world that way? And the third piece there is simply in terms of understanding the will and the exercise of its freedom. And the first quotation there, really Scotus's discussion of choice is bringing these affections into mutual relationship and how they're present in every choice because my choices are mine. They define my character. And second, because my choices are rational and free. Because I am rational and free. This is who I am. And this is my moment of incarnate freedom. How am I going to put flesh and bones and a face on this reality? Again, about the next quotation there, the term will refers to the human person insofar as she loves, desires, and chooses. This self-relationship involving initiative and self-restraint is another way of speaking about reflective, rational desire, the foundation of moral choice. There are a lot of incredibly concrete applications for our self-understanding embedded in this philosophy, this theology. This is where conversion becomes a possibility, true change. Okay? This is where I know what commitment asks of me in terms of choosing, not once, but many times, to walk in this way, to live the gospel as brother or sister. Okay? This is what it asks of me, and I understand that. I learn that. All of that, I think, leaves me back to something I mentioned earlier, the absolute requirement that if I'm going to make this journey, I'm going to have to be a person of prayer. Okay. Francis, in the letter to the entire order, says, "Let the whole earth tremble, and the whole world shake, and the heavens exult when Christ, the Son of the living God, is present on the altar. O admirable heights, O humble simplicity, that the Lord of the universe so humbles himself that for our salvation he hides himself under the form of the little bread. Look, brothers and sisters, at the humility of God and pour out your hearts before him. Humble yourselves as well. Hold nothing back for yourselves." Now we believe that this revelation is not relegated to the because we have a sacramental vision of creation. And that this love and this revelation is there for us to pay attention, to consider, to wonder at. Let the whole earth tremble. It should make us nervous that there is so much, and we can only take in so little of it. Claire has this beautifully, and Mary Beth refers this into in her Scotus for Dunces. She says, Claire writes, "Always be lovers of God and your souls, and the souls of your sisters, and always be eager to observe what you have promised." Again, for us as Franciscans, to love the self, to love the sister, to be committed to what we have committed ourselves to. Okay? It's three things, but it's really one thing that expresses itself in different ways. As Mary Beth says in Scotus for Dunces, this passage from Clare affirms the sort of love that inspires the Franciscan spiritual tradition involves a threefold dimension: a love of God, a love of one another in community, and finally, fidelity to a commitment made. Therefore, to conclude, I'd simply ask you, do we have the courage to pray with Francis? And it's the prayer from the entire order on your page there. Almighty, eternal, just, and merciful God, give us frail and weak ones the grace to do for you alone what we know you want us to do, and to desire always what pleases you, thus inwardly cleansed, interiorly enlightened, and inflamed by the power of the Holy Spirit. May we be able to follow the footprints of your beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, and by your grace alone, may we make our way to you.